Alright, so this week we're going to do chapter 13, and there's parts of it I'm not going to spend a lot of time on because we've covered in the past, like I've kind of touched on it previously, and then there's other parts that I'm going to spend more time on, and I'm going to kind of follow the book because he does it somewhat methodically, which I think is probably easier to understand than trying to incorporate it all into a project. He basically says, we're making a new project, we're going to walk through these different pieces of mechanics as it pertains to routing and how you set up routing and what's the advantages of routing and so forth and the things to kind of watch out for. So in the first week we talked about this idea of, you have a user or a computer, they make a request, that request is then sent to the server. That request usually persists of something like, fetching static content. Go get me this web page. Go get me this image. Go get me this whatever. And the path to that piece of content, that file, that image, that whatever, map directly to the disk in some relative way. So if I was going to mywebsite.com/images/logo.j or png. Okay, that meant that, let me move this over on this side. So if this was mywebsite.com, that means that inside of here I have a folder called images, and inside of there I have some sort of file that is my logo. Okay? So if they map directly to one another. Well, with MVC, we kind of break that convention. We say, okay, we're no longer mapping directly to a piece of content. We're mapping to a class and a method. And the combination of that class and method, they do some work that return me content. Be it a web page, be it some sort of file download, be it some sort of serialized object, whatever that may be. It's returning content to me through some process of logic, through a class and a method. So in order to do that, this idea of routing was not invented, but this concept of routing or URL routing was kind of created by necessity to facilitate that work. So what I've done is I've gone in and created a new MVC, just a basic website, and we're kind of going to work from that. So through the book, they go through and they set up 3 controllers. So I'm just going to do this quick and dirty. Obviously, there's a home controller. It has an index, and in all of the controller instances, they do viewbag.controller equals, and then it's the name of the controller, viewbag.action equals, and the name of the action. And then the view we call is action name. Inside of views shared, we're going to add a new view and call it action name. And add. And then from here, we'll simply do div controller is, and we'll say viewbag.controller. Div action is viewbag.action. So we're pulling these values from the viewbag, controller and action, and displaying them in there. Now the reason we put the view in the shared folder is that we want it to be accessible from anywhere. We don't want it to be bound by convention to a specific controller. We want it to be accessible from any of the controllers. So we have a home controller. Let's see what other controllers they did. A customer controller. So let's just copy this. And they added another action results for list. So I'm just going to copy this, paste, and this will be list. This will be action name, and action name. All right. Yeah, that's sufficient enough for what we need to do. Okay. So F6, F5. So when we first launch the application, it comes up and it says that you are running on the home controller the index action. Okay. So what that really looks like in the URL is home/index. Right? The routing system, which you can look at in great detail by going to app start route config, has these mapped routes predefined. And inside of this you have three components. You have the name of the route, the URL structure that the route system is supposed to match against, and then you also have default values. So what's happening here is that controller is mapped to home, action is mapped to index, and ID is marked as optional, therefore it's ignored. So whatever that we type in there maps to those things. We've talked about this before, right? Okay? So that concept is carried throughout. So if we go customer./index, we're hitting the customer controller with the index action. Customer/list, customer controller, list action. Alright? Nothing new. Where things start to get interesting is if I drop the ID, stop debug. If I drop ID, recompile, and then I say customer list Gen X, I get a 404. Or if I drop the defaults entirely, so if I do customer index, customer index, controller action. If I do Gen X, 404. If I drop the index, I also get a 404. So the routing system is looking for this exact pattern of something/something to map and match against. Without it having both components and no defaults to fill in the blanks, the system will not match. The routing system will not do what it needs to do. Now those names, controller and action, are just tokens. They don't mean anything, except for their relevance to the routing system within the MVC framework. Now, there's different ways of managing these routes or defining the routes. So map route is the most often used and the most convenient way of doing it, because map route kind of basically says this is an MVC route. This is MVC conventions or concepts. The routing system is actually bigger than that, though. It can be used within a web forms application. It's used within the web API system. So it works across all these systems, and there's actually hooks that are even lower level within IIS itself, and you can use it for this idea of viewing URL rewrites. So you can create your own routes by saying, what am I trying to do here? Route, my route equals new. And then we pass in the components of the route that we want to define. So we say our URL, controller, /action. And then route handle is the mechanism that actually does the work when this route matches. So what we'll do here is new MVC route handle. And we say routes.add my route. These two options here with the defaults commented out are identical. This map route infers, or by default, uses this route handle. This route handle is really nothing more than an implementation of iRoute handle with these methods. So if you're curious or interested, you can actually go create your own class, implement this interface, and see what kind of work you need to do to manage those routes. There's other ones in here. I know that there's a static route handle. Or is it non-route? I was just looking at this earlier. Oh, well, poo. I found somewhere I was going to show you, there's a listing of all the different things that implement iRoute handle, but I don't see it. Alright, so anyway, so that's the basic concept of setting up a route. Now this new route has a few overload options. So you have route value dictionary, the constraints, the data tokens, the defaults. So same type of things you would do with map route, but you're doing it by actually creating a route object and then adding it to the collection of routes. Alright, so the defaults are defined using an anonymous type. So the anonymous type, again, is that new curly brackets, and then anything that you put in here, this is the property, this matches this token name, this is the value that's replaced, action, token name, index, right? Not a new concept. We talked about this before, but that's the association. So what the routing system does is if it sees a controller, then it assumes that that is the controller. If there's nothing after that, / whatever, for the action, it will then assume by default that it should be /index. So if we go customer / recompile, it then assumes that it's the index action. If we make this list, it then will assume that it's list. The only time it doesn't use the default is when there's a value there. Okay? If we brought the ID back, route, I deleted it and I forgot what the value was. I forgot it, so I'll just go on. It'll come to me later. Okay. Any questions around that piece? Now, these routes can be stacked. So we can create two instances. So we can make this one say public / controller / action.
Can you stack multiple in the same route?
What was that?
Can you stack multiple in that, like put a default one and add
No, so each one of these is a unique route. Right. So add /public / controller / action or controller / action. Now what'll happen here is if I go public / customer / index, I end up with a 404. And the reason for this is that the order in which these routes appear is the order that they're processed. And they're relatively conservative, but they're also liberal in the sense that I'm going public / customer / index. So it's going to start with the first route, which is ignore all the AXD references. And then it says public / controller / or public / customer / index. And it says this is public / customer / something else that doesn't match. So it skips it. It then goes down to the next one and it says public / customer / index. And that should be the one that it picks up. Let me make sure I compiled. And it does. Now if I were to come back here again and say /ID, so they both balance, they have the same number of parameters. I get a 404. What it's doing is it's attempting to find a controller called public. Because I have three items, I have public / customer / index. It's looking at this route and it's saying public / customer / index. In that first line. Public / customer / index. It matches this default route. And because it matches, it's attempting to find a controller called public, an action called customer, and it's putting the index value inside the ID. Okay. If I switch these, just switching them and cutting and pasting correctly. It then matches the other way. It's now using the customer controller with the index action. So the order in which these are added makes a difference. So what's the relevance here? What's the big deal? So think down the road for a minute. What if you wanted to dynamically load routes into your system? You're building a system and you want to be able to dynamically add routes. Maybe you're building controllers that live in a DLL file somewhere else, and you want to add routes. You want to inject routes into your system because you built these plugins and you're plugging them in. That ability now is you got to make sure that you're not stepping on anybody's existing plugins, and you're wanting to make sure that your routes are unique, and hopefully that they're getting loaded before the rest. Or flip it the other way. If you're loading plugins, you don't want the plugin to step on your master route. You want your route to trump anything that may come in behind you and potentially step on your default settings. So those are things to keep in mind. As you add these routes, they can not trump each other, but the first one loaded takes precedence over the rest. The strongest match first. So something else that we could do, and it's very simple, and I actually kind of like the way the book does this, is they simply go in here and they say X. Alright, so you see the difference here? So this is controller/action, it goes to home/list. Public controller action goes to home/list, which list doesn't exist. It's index. But when I go X controller/action, it goes customer/list. So if I come in here, I can just say X customer. And it knows to pull that piece after the X, so that static element is actually within the path. So if I change it from customer to home, and change list to index, it knows that the X is a static component. So what's the value there? Let's say that you're releasing a different version of your website, but all your paths are basically the same. If you want to have a beta, maybe all of your routes to your beta are beta home, beta whatever, blah, 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 blah. So you actually can inject these static elements into your routes, into your paths, to help make them unique, so that they don't step on or trump existing elements. So before, we talked about this idea of /ID. Now the ID is not necessarily a standard piece of route data. Or maybe we call it something besides ID. We call it favorite color. Okay? If we go back to our view, we're going to add another element in the view bag. inside of my controller, say my default is home index, I can say view bag favorite color equals route data dot values favorite color. So the route data values gives us access to those parameters by name. So when we define the names here, that might be case sensitive, so let me adjust that. We're actually getting the ability to go in and pluck those values out. Three forbidden. Default document is not configured for this URL. Oh. So home/index/blue. Start a code block. Oh, that's why it was yelling at me. F5. Okay. So using route data gives you that access to those elements. Now, he doesn't talk about this in the book, but I read somewhere else, and I didn't actually have a chance to try this, so let's give it a shot. Viewbag.favorite color equals favorite color. I believe the parameter names actually will get mapped as well, but I could be mistaken. Red. Yes. So, we use the route data.values to pull that out. But the routing engine actually knows that its favorite color has a meaning, it's relevant. So because we put in here home/index/red, that it actually takes that favorite color and turns it into something that can be referenced as a parameter for the action. So by giving our action the name, or giving the parameter name favorite color, it maps. So red up in the address, red shows up down here. If I call it apples, so this one's object favorite color equals null. No, actually let's do it this way. Equals apples. Right. So if we put a breakpoint here, run again, close. Apples does not map. So I just want you to see that explicitly. It's actually mapping off of the route values. So because it's called favorite color here, it has to be called favorite color here in order to retrieve that value. If we wanted, we can change this to apples. F6. And then it maps again. So there's relationships that exist there, even though they just seem somewhat arbitrary and just to be strings, they have some relevance. Okay, so Delete that. So what if there's data we want to put past here? There could be other pieces of data we want to collect past red. To do that, we define what's called kind of a catch-all or optional parameters or optional segments. And to do that, we use the same convention. We give it a name in curly brackets, but we precede it with a star, an asterisk. That tells the routing system, take whatever's left and just store it like a string. So if we go here and we go home/compile, home/index/red/cat sandwich, we get what we want. And then within the controller, I can say, and we use this again, we can say string more stuff, view bag more stuff equals more stuff. Div more stuff equals view bag more stuff undefined. So if we run it again, F6. More stuff is cat sandwich. And it just keeps kind of collecting that. So if you had data that you wanted to just kind of put in there, if you think about things that Amazon does, they have these dynamic URLs. So you go out and you search for something, and it doesn't give you product ID, blah, 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 blah. It says, product/music/artist/this, and what's going on. Well, what happens is that this more stuff gets sucked in by its routing system within Amazon, and then they parse it. And then they do database lookups, and they link and collect and connect all those pieces together so that they give you the right product every time. And the URL is more significant than just saying product ID 5734. So that idea is you're now starting to collect this data in a very natural way. You're not making it complex. You're making it very simple and specific. But you're not having to actually make folders. So if you think about what I said in the beginning is, here's my site, and if it was, I don't know, I even lost track of what I'm doing. It'd be home/index/red/cat. Nope. Sandwich. And then I put a file in here. Default.html. So that would be the actual page. So it's not that like Amazon is going out and every time they add a new product, they're adding more folders and then putting a default file in there or an index. They're using this routing system to parse and look up data from the database. Alright, I got one more thing and then I'm done. So as I started to get into this, I started to get excited. Alright, I'm actually working on a project for work where I'm having to do this exact thing, so it was kind of fun to actually run across this chapter again and go, oh yeah, we can do that. So, your controllers don't all have to live inside of your MVC project. You can actually come up here and we can say new, or add, new project, C# class library, and I'm just going to call it MVC, or I'll call it this. More controllers. So, as always, you're back to the class, and we'll call this home controller. Now we need to add a couple of references. Those are primarily, make sure I get the right ones. Add reference to system, control E, system.web.mvc, version 4. Okay. So then we'll do public action results index view bag dot controller equals more controllers home view bag dot action equals index view bag dot favorite color equals string favorite color. View bag dot more stuff equals route data dot values more stuff. View action name. Okay. F6. Yes, it does. Okay, where do those go? Alright. We'll just drop more stuff for now. Not sure why that's not there. So F6. Oh, return F6. And then we need to add into our MVC app a reference to this new class library. So if we add reference from our solution, more controllers. So what that does is it's going to build more controllers, creates a DLL file, and then it's actually going to copy that DLL into the bin directory of our MVC Week 12 app. So there's all of our C# files and everything get put into this DLL. There's the other stuff like the entity framework, there's web infrastructure, there's a whole lot of stuff that gets sucked in when you do one of these basic apps. But the stuff we're worried about is MVC Week 12.dll and then the more controllers.dll. So I haven't done a build yet, so you don't see it. But once I do right click, a rebuild, there's more controllers. So it builds and it sucks it in. So it's now part of the execution pipeline for this app. Simply by the virtue of it being in this bin directory, it gets sucked in and executed. That's just part of the way ASP.NET does what it does. So by dropping a DLL in here, assuming it complies with some basic fundamentals, it will become part of your application. So if let me double check my routes. And it also adds more controllers here, so in case you were curious. Route config, I'm going to go ahead and just whack this. I'm going to comment it out. And I'm going to make, I'll leave it as necessary, so F6. Enter. And what happens is that MVC now recognizes that the home controller exists in two places. It exists in MVC week 12 controllers home controller, and it also exists in more controllers dot home controller. And it doesn't know which one to use. We can specify constraints, or actually it's just the namespaces that we want it to use specifically. And the way that we do that, I want to make sure that I have my syntax correct. Yeah. Is, so if you look at this overload, it takes the name, which is default, the string, which is controller / action / favorite color / more stuff / defaults, which is an object, which is an anonymous type, and then it takes an array of strings for namespaces. So we can say new, open bracket, close bracket, curly brace, more controller, and then we can say MVC week 12 dot controller. So in that order, namespaces, F6. So in that order, it will attempt to search through those namespaces to try to find controllers. And if it finds one in the first namespace, then it uses it. If it doesn't, it goes on to the next namespace. So if we come back now and hit enter, F6. Yes. Well, it should. Maybe I did this. Oh, is that my problem? Yep, you're right. Yeah, I see it. Thank you. Okay, let's just try one. Okay. So it's using more controllers home, right? All right. So my mistake was we can add a second route. And in the second route, we replace the namespace. So remember that idea of prioritization. That was the piece I misread. So what happens is it goes through here, it hits home, index, it looks in more controllers. If it finds a match, it becomes part of the requirements. If it finds a match, it uses that controller. If not, it then falls through to the next one, and then we'll look in MVC week 12 controllers. So you get that prioritization of where does that controller live? Where do I need to go to find it? So if we have 6, we should still. Oh, yeah. 6. So there's more controllers. If we go ahead and use customer, then we're using the standard controller, or the standard library controller. Now we could do one better, and we could say, we could drop the more stuff. So we're using more controllers, but if we add the cat sandwich back, our route with more controllers does not take that additional string option. It's just those 3 parameters. So by adding the cat sandwich, it has to revert back to the home controller in the other library because that's a better match for the route.
Even you specify the namespace?
Yes, because the more controllers route does not use or have that ability to take the additional data. The route doesn't have the asterisk with the token. So because it doesn't know how to handle that additional data, it then falls right to the next route that is able to match. Because the lower route has star more stuff, this can take cat sandwich. The one above it can't.
Now, can you do the same thing within the same namespace? 2 different controllers?
No, they have to be unique. And that really holds true for just C# in general. You can't have 2 classes with the same name in the same namespace. So the last thing that the book does talk about, and I'll leave it up to you, it's kind of a neat thing, but it's not that super, is that if you want to write a route that has a constraint, you can use regular expressions to build constraints. So you can say if the controller starts with the letter H, that regular expression, then use this route config. You can set those things up as well. So that's in the book. So if you're interested in that, you can look at it online. It's kind of neat, but it's not a big deal. It also walks through the ability where you can define custom constraints where you can do things like a user agent constraint. So if the user agent is Chrome, use this controller, or if it's something else, use the other controller. There is a note in here that says he is not advocating different controllers for different browsers, that you should treat all browsers the same, which is true. If the browser can't keep up with the technology, that's the browser's fault. And hopefully you know who I'm talking about. Then the other piece that it talks about is that the routing system is designed by default to look at the URL request and check the disk first. So back to that convention with the folder, it will actually look for a folder called home, a folder called index, a folder called red, a folder called cat, a folder called sandwich with the default.htm file inside of it before it executes the route. So if I actually take the time and effort here, let's just do this the easy way. Home, index, red, cat, sandwich, new, default. home index red cat sandwich, that takes precedence over the routing system completely. If it finds a match at the file system level, it will serve that up before it attempts to route. Within the route config, routes dot, what is it that I want? I think it's routes existing files. If you set this to true, then that tells the routing system, even if a file exists, route it. Send it to the routing system first. So if I F6 with that line in there, and I hit enter, I get back to the home index favorite color red with the cat sandwich. Now, the problem is, if I put some sort of empty bitmap image, yeah, I don't know what that is. This is a client logo, so I guess I can use that. And I go logo.png, it'll serve up because the .png doesn't know how to handle it. It's not part of this traditional route schema. So it defaults back. But if I just had something called logo, which it may not like, it's going to treat it as more stuff. So you have to kind of, the author does not recommend using this. They recommend that being a last resort, routing existing files, because you're going to end up stepping on a lot of stuff, and kind of it leaves you, the developer, to have to handle all those kind of clunky scenarios where if every request is coming to your routing system, you have to figure out what to do with them. You got to serve it off to a controller somewhere with an action, or do some work. Now maybe that's what you want to do, so you would want to implement that or disable the existing files being routed. But if you don't, you're better to let it do its work by default. So just something to kind of keep in mind. So that functionality is there. I'm not advocating you use it unless you have a need or a purpose for doing it.